Welcome to Halftime. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a Halftime alumni from Greenville, South Carolina, in the USA. This is our 51st Halftime webinar event, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that you've joined us today. Halftime is the world's leading peer learning center for successful people who are in transition. We teach, coach, and connect leaders who are looking for more meaning, joy, and impact in their next season. Now, please let me know in the chat if the video and the audio are okay. You know, it's hard to tell from here, so we need to know. So if you'll just write there in the chat that the video and audio are okay, or whatever, however it's coming across, that really, really helps. Now, also what helps is to vote in today's polls, and this will prioritize Lloyd's comments at the end. It also influences our future programming because what you vote on is the direction we'll go in the future. Now, I think you're really going to enjoy today's event, Developing the Next Generation of Leaders. Let me bring on Lloyd Reeb, the co-founder of Halftime. Now, Lloyd, welcome. And I think it's just fantastic that we're focusing on our next generation of leaders because, after all, they're our messengers to the future, I like to call them. Now, Barbara Mulkey is just one of many Halftime alumni that we're highlighting that has made mentoring a priority. But I'm interested, do you recall Barbara's reaction when she realized that mentoring young leaders was really her next season passion?
Yeah, well, I remember, for some reason, I remember each person's story as it unfolds. It's like watching a flower come out, Doug, and it didn't just happen all at once. It was something she had done in her engineering firm, and it was something that she found enjoyable, but she really didn't think that it would be something that could take up her time, or maybe that she was fully equipped to mentor younger leaders in the broadest areas of their life, as opposed to really in their corporate career strategies. And she wasn't quite sure what platform. And so, as you'll hear in her story, it kind of evolved little by little. And for any of us who are in Halftime, our listeners, if you're starting into your journey, that's likely what's going to happen is you're going to iterate your way into something deep and rich, like what you'll hear from Barbara. She had a conflict tonight, and we pre-recorded her video, and then we'll talk about unpack it. Doug and I will with you once she's finished her story. But what really strikes me is how many of us reach this point in life where we realize we've got all this wisdom, and we don't necessarily want to spend all our time mentoring, but we would like to slice into our life some mentoring in maybe even just in our family and among our friends' children. And sometimes there's obstacles like you have in the poll, Doug, that stand in our way. We may not feel fully equipped. We may not know where to start. We may not know how to find them. And you're going to hear in Barbara's story a lot about how she navigated that to find a platform that has had a pretty meaningful impact over the next 5 years. And then we'll come back and let's talk about it. So be sure along the way to drop your questions in the question section down at the bottom. And not that Doug and I have all the smart answers, but we have been really leaning into this topic since so many Halftime alumni find this to be an important part of their portfolio.
So we'll be a little more active, or actually a lot more active in the chat than we normally are, because again, the Barbara's portion of this is pre-recorded. So Lloyd and I will be there in the chat. We can answer short questions there, or if you have a long question, please use the Ask a Question link down at the bottom center of the screen. So Lloyd, I think we're ready if you are.
You bet.
All right. Well, you're going to really enjoy this. Barbara is just a fantastic speaker. So here we go. This was recorded just a few days ago. Welcome, Barbara and Lloyd. What could be more important than helping guide our next generation of leaders. Well, today we're going to be focusing on the most important element of a halftimer's journey, and that is sharing or mentoring the next generation of values-based leaders. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. This time last year, Barbara Mulkey announced her retirement, but really this was her second retirement. And after receiving her master's from NC State during a time when few women actually did, she also founded her own engineering firm, Mulkey Engineer and Consultants. Today, she's heralded as a respected transportation expert and has also been inducted to the North Carolina Transportation Hall of Fame. During her experience at Halftime, she discovered she had a passion for mentoring the young, talented leader at her alma mater, North Carolina State University. And in the past 5 years, Barbara has been the director of Shelton Leadership and has helped develop the values of our next leaders. She's led personalized education and hands-on outreach programs for pre-college, college, and also professionals. We're also joined by Lloyd Reeb, Halftime Institute's founding partner. Now, in today's short 30-minute time together, Lloyd and I will explore how Barbara discovered her passion, her platform, and actually what she's learned through the process. Lloyd, I appreciate you spending time on this mentoring our next generation. How have you seen this impact those that are mentoring, as we really tend to focus on the mentee's experience?
Yeah, well, many of us reach this halftime season of life and we have years of experience and expertise and influence and a network, and we find an area of passion that might be the boulder in our next half portfolio. But almost all of us have this desire to mentor some younger leaders, maybe even just an hour a week or several hours a week. But it's difficult to find, those talented young leaders that are coming up behind us, and then to have a pathway to start the conversation and a process to help them with that. And that's what I think we can learn from Barbara today, among other things. But, one of the things that you're alluding to, Doug, is that as you and I reach back to those that are, a generation or two behind us and share our wisdom and expertise, it does a couple of things, I think. And Barbara, you can speak to this. Number one, it helps us clarify our own life learnings. I think it helps us develop and onboard the skills that we need that we might not have nurtured in corporate life, of mentoring the whole person in a broader sense than just being, say, a corporate sponsor, Doug, like you might have been in, all the years in woven electronics as you merged with other companies and acquired other companies. And actually what I've noticed is that it helps us as grandmothers and grandfathers, fathers and mothers, in mentoring the people we love in our own family. And so I don't know if you've noticed that as well, Barbara, but what comes to my mind as I think about your journey was I still remember those days in Raleigh, your hometown, with your halftime round table group around you, and you'd be up front presenting your plan and wondering, how do I use all this background as an engineer and really a code breaker of women building regional engineering firms, and how do I apply that? And I remember you kind of thinking first about the next generation of leaders and wondering, well, where would I find a platform for that? And yet over the past 5 years, you have built that out in the Shelton Leadership Center, and not only kind of build out their long-term strategy, which was part of your skills in running your business, and a short-term strategy, but as I studied a bit about what you did, you've kind of clarified and defined the 4 primary focuses of the Shelton Leadership Center, put the branding and reorganizational plan into place before you stepped out, and you used the wide array of your own business connections to build kind of pathways, right, for NC State students to be able to find internships and to begin to be mentored by others like you and I that are own and operate businesses. So take us into your halftime journey. How did you discover this passion for mentoring, first of all, And then how did you work your way into a platform like NC State? Uh, and by the way, as you know, my son Carter spent a lot of time there. He got his PhD ultimately there, and we have a great respect for the school. So it's a world class platform. Tell us about how that came to be.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to stick to a few notes. Sometimes I use notes to make sure I have enough to say. When you talk about this topic, I have to use notes to make sure I don't say too much because I could go on and on. You're right. I went through halftime and I felt like I was coming to the end, and I'm thinking, I don't think I have my answer right now. I'm not sure what it is. But I did get closer and closer, and I did start seeing that I wanted to help motivated individuals take the next step in their journey in a positive way. And I do say motivated individuals, and that really also included organizations. But as I was trying to look at what my opportunities might be, I really felt like because of some of my personal responsibilities with elderly parents and grandchildren that I was looking at volunteer services or at most part-time. And so be careful what you say you're not going to do because sometimes there's other plans for you. And so as I was looking at things, I was very familiar with the Shelton Leadership Center and had been very involved at NC State for many years and had a tremendous respect for General Shelton and his values and how he lived them out even as he invoked them in his center. I had even asked him at one point in my journey with my company, no pay invited or anything, if he would be my personal advisor. I think if I had read his memoirs before that, I wouldn't have had the courage to know, this great leader, but he did it, and he did it for years. And when their time came going on a national search for a new director, and they came to me and asked, I felt like, how could I say no? But actually did say no at first because it wasn't fitting what I thought I was looking for. But the more my husband and I prayed about it and thought about it, it was amazing how it seemed that I'd been preparing all my life for this role. I felt like my business skills were sorely needed for this organization to be all that they could be. I felt like the academy needed these business skills. I felt like the combination could really benefit. And I saw what it could do with the private community and the partnerships. And in addition to that, I had been highly involved at many levels at the university, where I had even been chair of their board of trustees. So that came to bear, that I understood how the center fit. So it just seemed like it was meant to be. And I threw my hat in the ring, and I was chosen, and was not their typical. I didn't have a terminal degree like all the others had. Didn't have a military background like all the others had. I was a female, but it was just right for me, and I think it was right for them.
So talk about, what exactly did the Shelton Leadership Center do? How do they impact kids' lives? 1 year ago, I think when you stepped out, you had really checked a lot of the boxes of what you wanted to accomplish. So what was the vision that you started with, and share maybe a story or two of a student whose life was changed?
Well, this is where I could talk on and on. For those who don't know, the Shelton Center was started in 2002, so they're enjoying their 20th year this year, by General Hugh Shelton, who was the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under 2 administrations and is a North Carolina native and an alum of NC State. And their vision at first was a scholarship. And lo and behold, it just grew and grew and grew to become this center that the vision was to really impact every student at NC State and then beyond. We're being exposed to values-based leadership in addition to their other academic work. So their mission became to inspire, educate, and develop values-based leaders committed to personal integrity, professional ethics, and selfless service. And I will have to say that so many people think about academic things being, it's all theory. Well, General Shelton would have none of that. He wanted to see action. I mean, he wanted action. And if it was theory, it needed to show where it was going to lead into service and action. And all of the programs there do reflect that. And I tried to, I really tried to reflect on what I was most proud of while I was leading the center. And I would say that I think local and I think international. So of like two key programs that had such an impact that were created while I was there. First, you think global. We developed an actual minor in global leadership and decision making. And we were able to get it accepted for an accredited minor through the academy, which is unusual for a center to offer for credit minors and courses and degrees. But we were able to develop a program where we took a cohort for a semester abroad, and they studied in 3 different countries under the tutelage of NC State instructors and local academy instructors for the semester. And when they came back, they had earned a degree in global leadership and decision making. And I can tell you that has had a big impact on their resumes for employers who have looked at that. And they also, the first cohort was actually in Europe when COVID hit, and they had to find their way. Everybody was called back home. And so they had some leadership experiences that played into that. And then I think the second thing closer to home is the chancellor tapped us to develop and implement a program for students, for first generation students from the rural, most disadvantaged economically counties in North Carolina and beyond, to better prepare them to be successful once they got to NC State. And we were so successful at that, we were able to actually attract significant endowment funding, and we were able to expand that program to 3 years. And it has been highly successful. And to watch these students, some of these students have never seen the ocean, and they live 3 hours away. Some have never been out of state. Many have never flown on an airplane, and almost none had ever had a passport. Well, when they finish our programs, they've done all of that.
That is sweet, Barbara. Is there a story that just pops to your mind of a student that that you think, gosh, it would be worth it all if I just touched that kid's life?
There are several, and I would just say there was a young woman, and she was one of those, her parents weren't even comfortable. They weren't comfortable flying on planes, and they didn't want her to fly on a plane. And she had been highly protected in her life about that. And over the year, the center, our staff was able to talk with her parents and give her that opportunity to get on an airplane. And she actually went to London and had some experiences meeting with potential employers. And I mean, just the experiences they gained were immeasurable. This was not a tour. This was a working, active, each day a student who went was in charge of leading the group to get where they had to go. Through the subways, whatever it was. When she came back, she said, when I graduate, I want to go work in England. And so this child who hardly had left Raleigh was courageous enough to think that she was going to go picture her career being in an international environment.
So, Barbara, when you think back to those halftime roundtable meetings when you're sitting there and everybody feels a little confused and it pops into your heart, well, maybe I'll just go back and mentor other young, talented women leaders that are going to be like, change the world, right? Now you've done that, right? That's like a whole chapter. It's a whole chapter in your journey. How would you encourage other talented halftime alumni that are just 25 yards behind you and have a longing to mentor the next generation?
Well, I guess I'm just thinking about, I have to go back to the university setting. For me personally, having been a part of the university, I see so many opportunities at any college, any university that is just begging and needing that kind of mentorship, whether it's business, whether it's personal, whether it's mental health, which is a huge issue for students these days. And I don't think universities always understand how to reach out. Faculty, first of all, don't always understand the value of that practical business connect, because they have pretty much 90+% of them have never been out of the academic world. And it's very important for people like us to go in and give these students an opportunity to have some real life experience and hear when they get out here, what they're going to be facing. But also at a different level, I learned it had never occurred to me that there's a serious food insecurity issue on campuses. There are homeless students on campuses. There are homeless instructors on campuses. There are students who don't have the clothes they need to go to an interview. So we get so used to thinking they made it to college, it's all taken care of. But I can tell you there are students that are one bill away from going home. One bill, one broken computer, one book required that they don't have the money for, that they think they got to go home. They don't understand. And they're crying out for people who can be there to help these students navigate, because many of their parents, still across the country, 50% of students are first-time college students. That's hard to believe, but it's true.
Wow. Doug, any thoughts, questions in your mind before we move to Barbara's next season a little bit?
Yeah, boy, as an engineer myself, I'm just blown away with everything you've done. When we talk about impacting the next generation and its importance, and I like to say, after all, they're our messengers to the future. Many of us love our alma mater, but it's tough to know where to really start. What advice would you have on pursuing, opportunities for mentoring and serving students, but also infusing our Christian values?
Well, obviously one challenge in especially public universities can be the whole issue of a lot of focus on Christian talk. And I have learned that should not stop you in any way. I think sometimes we overreact to concern about what you can and cannot say. But for me, I was able for 5 years to live in that environment, and I never, and I lived my Christian values the very best that I could, and I never really had an issue. Sometimes for me, going into situations I knew were not going to be very popular from that perspective, I just simply wore, my little cross or, and it's amazing how many people connect with you when you make a statement or just something. You don't really have to shout it out. But another thing I would say is for people who are not knowing how to connect, I suggest, first of all, your area that you studied. So if, like for us engineering, I started by reaching out to my department, engineering department, but my heart went different places than that. And that's what led me to checking in with the career counseling, for example, where that's how I found out you can donate clothes for for students to interview, or you can go and rehearse with them their interviews, and there's all kinds of opportunities there. Also, most colleges these days do have a food bank of some type, and you'd be amazed at what the needs are there. It's sad, but it's true. And I guess lastly, your alumni association is a great to connect you with young alums.
And for those listening that would love to mentor a young leader, young Christian leader maybe, that's further along than college, someone who's perhaps an entrepreneur building a values-based business that runs like a business and serves like a ministry, we've created a platform called ardentmentoring.org designed to help you find some young leader that's talented, that's been vetted by us, and kind of make a match. So you can just check it out at Ardent, ARDENT, mentoring.org, because we hear so many people like the way Barbara was feeling back in her halftime journey and wondering, how do I get started? And this is designed to just be a simple, easy on-ramp. You could test it out. Like we say, always do a low-cost probe. You could test it out with just one young leader. So now, Barbara, let's turn the corner, because there's some more that we as a halftime tribe or community can learn from you. And that is, you've now checked the box of getting through university, getting, your professional engineering certifications, and building an organization out of it and having it be successful and sell it. And then doing 5 years of, like we just went through, really reshaping the trajectory of an amazing platform. I wish we could show you all a picture of the setting where Barbara was leading and sort of some of the scale of what she's done. And now you're sitting at the threshold of what I would call Halftime 2.0. And we're going to go through multiple renewals, right, in our season, and particularly if we're healthy. And, I've been through several of these renewals, even though I've been on the functioning and serving from the same Halftime Institute platform. My role has changed quite a bit, right? And so tell us a little bit about where you're at as you stand on the threshold of Halftime 2.0, and what are you feeling like, and how are you thinking about the next season?
Well, I've learned so much about myself, and I've learned that I do live my life in seasons. That I think is the entrepreneur part of me, that I like variety and I like to learn. I'm a lifelong learner. And I do want to say I highly advise mentoring of young entrepreneurs, because I learn as much as they do. We learn from we mentor each other, really. And so I highly advise that, and that's part of my 2.0, I guess. I'm also trying to balance some of my personal responsibilities that are very important to me. Again, an elderly mother and time with grandchildren, with what my current passions are and what I think I can offer. And it's very interesting that I honestly am exploring some type of service to work with people who are dealing with care of elderly. And I'm not so much of a touchy-feely person in that regard, but there's so much business and there's so much technology that I've learned that can be brought to bear, and there's so much legal information. I feel like I've had a course over the last 15 years from having walked that path with a number of elderly relatives. And I feel like that I have that to share, and I have that heart for that. So I'm praying about that right now, and still thinking I do want to continue my mentoring with young professionals because I still love business. It keeps me young and interested without having to own a business myself. And lastly, on my bucket list, I'd like to join a private board at some point because I think that would be a great learning experience for me.
So, Peter Drucker used to say that historically leaders have gone from warrior to king to sage, three kind of seasons in life. And I think when you were starting the business, you were in the warrior category, right? It felt like hand-to-hand combat and trying to make payroll and trying to win, consulting deals. And then you became king and you kind of, in the best sense of that word, a servant leader inside, Mulkey Engineering, but also a servant leader in what you just did in the Shelton Leadership Center. And now it strikes me that you're moving into more of a role where you bring wisdom and influence and less operational intensity, not 40 hours or 45 hours a week. And that's, it's interesting. There's so much freedom, right, in that to say, okay, that was a season. I don't have to hang on to the CEO role. And I remember Drucker saying something like the transition from king to sage is the most difficult because you give up all the levers and you're left with influence and thought leadership and really build on trust, right? It sounds to me like that's a transition that may be happening, even if it's just at a heart level for you. How would you react to that?
I totally agree. And, I do agree. I don't personally feel that it's going to be difficult for me. It hasn't been to move out of that role. For me personally, and I know others have struggled, but for me, I've always felt ready. And that's sort of how I knew. I feel like in my private business, I probably stayed longer than I should have. And I think then maybe God had in mind for me, maybe. And so I learned my lesson and I listened carefully. And when my 5 years was up at the center, I knew I was ready and I knew I had accomplished. And so I really feel that way about this next phase. I feel ready for it. It feels comfortable to me to be, like as much as I can to be that wise owl maybe that other people want to talk with. But it's important to me to always be learning new things too. Mm-hmm. And so I'll always seek out areas that aren't just what I know, but that what I can learn as well.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That reminds me of, again, back to Peter Drucker. He studied, when he turned 60 or 65, he decided he was going to study a different topic for 3 years at a master's degree level. And so when I was last with him, he had studied, I think, 11 different topics. Now think about that as somebody who taught all of his life in a university setting. I tried that for a few years, Barbara, and it was so intense. So now I use a master class. Last night I was listening to a famous presidential historian, Goodwin, I think is her last name, and just learning from her. And I think that when you move from king to sage, you need to continually learn from all different angles so you can bring not only your wisdom and your own experience, but the perspective that you have of really looking at life as a great observer of the world and bring that wisdom down to younger people. So, Doug, how would you wrap up our time together with Barbara?
Well, the first thing was there were really three things that struck me, Barbara. And these might not have even been your main points, but to think of food banks at a university and the need for that, and I can relate to the one where you said, well, you're one book away from having to drop out. But I really thought that was kind of unique to me, and sometimes it was a grade when it was associated with me. But I also love the idea of the interviewing that you mentioned. These are all low cost ways, and halftime we talk about this a lot, that any of us could get involved in food banks or being involved in maybe some small financing or helping the students. But also, gosh, what would be easier than helping them practice for an interview? So what great low cost probes those are, and I just loved everything we talked about. Well, I know, Lloyd, we're just about out of time, and I just first of all wanted to thank Barbara for taking so much time with us today. This has just been fantastic. Lloyd, always a pleasure. We always end up with such inspiring alumni. Halftime is just a great place to be. Do you have any suggestions if somebody was really struck by some of the things Barbara said today, how they can get involved and learn more from Halftime?
Yeah. So I would say just send along an email, and it'll be in the bottom of the screen, I believe, and we'll pick it up with you from there and help you get connected, either by testing out a mentoring role like we talked about at ardentmentoring.org, or by helping you connect with others who are building out programs like this with their alumni. There are a handful of others like Barbara who have similar programs, not like the Shelton Center, but they're reaching back through their alma mater to make a difference in the lives of young people. So thank you, Barbara. Really love who you are and what you're doing and the inspiration you are to all of us. And we'll be praying for you as you map out the next season of your adventure.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Okay. I love that. Barbara, as an engineer, I just, I can relate to her really well, Lloyd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. She loves the systematic approach to mentoring. Some people mentor in a very casual way, which can be pretty powerful, but I know that she's taken a systematic approach to it. So we've got some time if folks have questions, and just jot them down either in the chat, and we will be glad to chit chat about them. If you've got something specific for Barb, you can email me and I'll get it to her personally because we're good friends. So Doug, do you want to look at some of the questions that we find?
I do, but I think first of all, I'd like to start with the poll because that might be something that everybody relates to the most.
Yeah. That's good.
Lloyd, 100% of our audience that responded to the poll, the first question, which is the only one I'm going to look at the moment, says their time is limited and they're concerned that this could require more time than they're willing to provide. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, time, every one of us has the same amount, right? 168 hours a week. And so part of what we learned together in the Halftime Institute is that you allocate your time just like you would your investment portfolio, and using your mission statement as a filter to say, what fits me? And, your personal mission statement, if you've come through Halftime or if you're about to, it will have three components to it: what you're best at, what you care the most about, and the difference you most want to make in the world. And that provides a filter. The mission statement is designed to be a filter to let you say no to most of the opportunities that come your way so you can say yes to just the best ones. So for some people like Rick Woolworth, who passed away, went to heaven recently, tragically, when he came through Halftime 15 years ago, he started something called Telemachus. And you may know that in Greek mythology, there was Mentor, who was the old guy with the gray hair like I have. And the younger person that he invested in was named Telemachus. And so Rick and Jill created Telemachus Network. You can look it up online, the Telemachus Network, Telemachus, from Greek mythology, to connect older mature leaders and with younger leaders, emerging leaders. They did it by events, they did it organically, and then they created processes for them to be able to do a journey together. So for Rick, mentoring was his primary purpose and calling beyond loving and serving his family. For others, it may not be. And what we found, though, is that for many people, they would like to do a little bit of it because they just love being with younger people. As I've said to Doug, by investing in young people, maybe when I'm 85 and I'm in a retirement home somewhere, somebody will, other than our kids, will come visit me. So that might be a perk 25 years from now. But the nice thing with mentoring is it's like sausage. You can cut it off anywhere. It could be 1 hour a week, or it could be, 1 hour a month. But what I have found is I've never had somebody say that mentoring a talented young leader who is eager to learn was a waste of time. And like Barbara said, Doug, was that she learns a lot from them. So there is such a thing as reverse mentoring. Just watch my kids help me with my phone or with my computer, and that's called reverse mentoring, right?
The sausage illustration is a little graphic.
Yeah, I mean, you could cut it off anywhere. It could just be, it could be your primary thing, or it could just, and the other thing is you can gain leverage by doing more than one at a person at a time. So Alan Smith is an oil and gas guy in Houston, came through Halftime 12 years ago, decided he wanted to mentor some young emerging leaders in the oil and gas business. So he rounded up 6 or 8 of them. And instead of doing it alone, he did it with a close friend. So if one of them's traveling, the other one pitches in. And there's really no curriculum. They come every other Friday to his conference room so he doesn't have to drive anywhere. And the big issue is what's happening. So they bring the content. And then he and his buddy Carter bring wisdom and good questions and careful listening and sometimes discipling and sometimes just simply compassion. So we've seen lots of models show up all around the country, but we know is an overwhelming percentage of Halftime alumni want to do some kind of mentoring. Now, like I mentioned in the chat, Doug, I was asking myself 5 years ago, I was asking myself the question, what's the most loving thing I can do for my friends and my brothers? Because I only have brothers in my family. And it dawned on me, they don't need anything. Most of my friends are fairly affluent. They're about my age. I mean, I can't give them gifts really. But it dawned on me the best thing I could do would be to take an interest in their boys. And so I made a list of them. And lo and behold, there were 10. And so I put a standing calendar appointment in my computer, on my calendar, for an hour once a month. And it just says, reach out to your friends, boys, and your nephews. And when I click on it, all their names are there and their contact info is there. And so several things happen. Number one, I know exactly who they are. Number two, the time is already protected. It's an hour a month. And then I listen, I think I go down their names and I think who really needs me to touch them in some way this month. And sometimes I do 3 or 4, sometimes more, sometimes just one. But basically they'll get 4 or 5 or 6 touches from me every year. It'll either be a note of encouragement, a question, a quote, a verse from the Bible, a book, or something that I can send them that will encourage them and, in a sense, mentor them, right? And then when the need arises, lo and behold, it triggers a big conversation. And so if you were to see some of their texts, like from one of my best friend's son, who was at Syracuse University, sent me a 3-paragraph text one day when he was a senior in college. I'm thinking, who's got time for that? Well, you know what? I might have been one of very few men that reach out to him on a regular basis, and he needed to talk to someone about an important topic.
Well, that convicts me a little bit because I have a nephew that I reach out to periodically when we run into each other, and I make a special point to talk to him because I think it's good. But what I hear you doing is you do it on a more regular basis. You make a point. You just not when there's a family thing or happenstance.
Yeah, and it's an hour a month. But the return on an hour is perhaps one of the most highly leveraged things. And think about it. I'm giving this gift back to my brothers. And on Father's Day, I got a text from my sister-in-law saying, "Thank you for investing in our kids." So it's kind of like a double return on that kind of mentoring, right?
And Lloyd, just when you have those conversations, there might be a tendency, and I'm probably guilty of it, of talking too much. What percentage of the time do you try and encourage these friends or these young men or young women of your friends and families? How much do you talk?
Yeah, I try to stick to 20% me talking, 80% them talking. And I don't give them any smart answers. These are things I learned from Bob. Ask good questions, um, make observations because people need perspective. Encourage the people you're mentoring by affirming what you see in them. Point out the landscape around them that they may not have perspective on. And then, once in a while, give them a recommendation when you're invited to do that. Um, and that's what I learned from watching him. And there's a great article that you can read, and we'll send it to everybody that's signed up for this in Inc. magazine, called The Uber Mentor. And it's an article about Peter Drucker's mentoring and how he did it and why he did it the way he did. And it's wrapped around those examples. And so I think if you're talking or I'm talking more than 20 or 25% with the people we're discipling or mentoring or encouraging, we're probably not being as helpful as we could be.
Well, that is so helpful. And if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Milana, please forgive me if I don't. She said, "What a great idea to list 10 people around us to make regular contact with." Lord, we've got two quick questions, I think, and you've kind of touched on them there. Halftime always suggests a low-cost probe. So what kind of mentoring low-cost probes would you recommend?
Um, you know, I think the easiest is to just simply look right around you and see who is a young person that when they're over at your house or when you bump into them at church, they stand around, they hang around, and they ask you questions. And then don't call it mentoring, just say, "Hey, do you got time for coffee?" And try it and ask them, how's life going? And we've got a great set of mentoring questions that we'll send to you. And you could literally just write down two or three of those questions or put them on your phone and start the conversation with those questions. And, like, what is the biggest challenge you're facing now when you think about the next 6 months of this year? One of the most powerful mentoring questions Bob Buford would ask me is, "What are you learning?" How many words is that, Doug? What are you learning? 4 words. It always made my head just spin thinking, well, gosh, I hope I'm not learning nothing. And then I had to think about what I was learning. And then he would probe that area where I'm learning because he knew that was an area where he could mentor me. So, first of all, I think just look around you. Secondly, you could go to Telemachus Network, Telemachus Network. And then if you like entrepreneurs, the Praxis Labs is a great place to find what I would call redemptive entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who are organizing and launching organizations that serve the disadvantaged, but operate like a business. So that's Praxis Labs, Praxis. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Ardent Mentoring is another opportunity that's really coming out of our halftime movement. By Chris Crane was a halftime alumni, won the Halftimer of the Year award 15 or 20 years ago, and this is his passion in his Halftime 2.0 is to connect halftime alumni that would love to mentor with young Christian entrepreneurs. So if you're an entrepreneur, that ardentmentoring.org is a great place to find one. But one of the things that's difficult is to know how to vet the people you're investing. You think about what are the characteristics of somebody I'd like to mentor. And, it may not just be talent and it may not just be the size of their organization. It may be the willingness they have, or the depth of their ability to really listen to the Spirit of God. Or you might come up with your own criteria. And if you're serving disadvantaged people, it may be a different set of criteria. So I think those are 3 or 4 places: Telemachus, Ardent Mentoring, Praxis Labs, and then we'll send you the Uber Mentoring magazine article from Inc. magazine.
But you said something interesting. You wouldn't call it mentoring when you maybe talk to these nephews. You think that that's not necessarily the word to use?
Well, it just maybe sets it up as too formal to start with.
I got you.
And
Yeah.
you don't necessarily need to label it anything, but what you're doing is labeled mentoring. It could be a blend of coaching, mentoring, discipleship, right? But it's sometimes a bit scary for someone when you say that you'd be interested in mentoring them, because it feels like they have to be super vulnerable, and they may not be quite ready for that, but they may grow into that intimacy and that vulnerability as you have coffee with them and hang out with them. And so I would start with someone close nearby that you can tell is really eager to learn from you, and just have a pocket full of good questions.
Sounds like some of the career counselors I had when I was in school. We have a second question, Lloyd, and thank you for answering that one. And I think you've really touched on these, but there might be a few more. Are there recommended mentoring resources you would recommend for someone preparing for their first mentoring opportunity?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think, like I said, maybe read this article from Inc. magazine. That sort of sets a very clear framework, and then get some good questions. Either make them up yourself, or we're going to send some to you. The other thing that's important is when you get into a formal mentoring relationship is to set the expectations with the other person. Here's what I'm willing to do, and here's what I can do. I'm not going to have all the answers for you. I'm not going to help you solve some of your funding issues or your organizational challenges. I'm going to bring wisdom and perspective to you. I'm going to ask good questions. I'm going to provide accountability to the degree that you're interested in that. And here are the things I expect from you. Now, Bob Buford taught me that he expected 4 things from me. Number 1, it was up to me to set the time up. He made that very clear. If you want me to mentor you, you set up the time with me. Number 2, he expected me to send him a long rambling note or an explanation of what was happening in my life. And that's what Peter Drucker asked him to do. He would ask him every time, send me a long rambling letter. Long meaning tell me a lot. Rambling meaning don't filter it all. Don't try to spiff up your life so it looks good. I want to know what's really happening. And then the third thing he taught me to do is tell me what you learned from our session. So I would always capture notes, and I would tell him, here's what I think I learned from our last time together. And then the last thing is, tell me what the results were. He said, the joy for me is in the results. And any mentor knows that the joy is in the results, seeing someone's life change and seeing the blessing in them and through them. So if you're setting the expectation with someone that you're mentoring, that may be one way to do it, is to say, I'm willing to invest in you. Now, here are 4 things I need from you. It's your job to set the time up with me. I want to know ahead of time what's happening in your life so I can think and prepare about it. Number 3, tell me what you learn. And number 4, tell me when you try it, tell me what the results are.
So what I hear is kind of be prepared with setting expectations, but also set some boundaries.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Well, we're at the top, almost at the top of the hour, Lloyd. As we wrap up here, and again, I so appreciate Barbara taking the time to do this, and I wish she was here at the end, but if anyone has any questions, you said you'd be happy to forward those to Barbara?
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you summarize, Lloyd, the importance of mentoring young leaders?
Well, I think, first of all, it keeps you sharp. It forces you to get clear on what the wisdom of your own life lessons are. It's a thin sliced way to be able to invest in the next generation and to, in a sense, stay current with what the issues are that they're facing. The side effect is to the degree that you gain skill in mentoring, it's going to equip you to be a better adult, a better parent to adults that are in their 30s and 40s, a better father-in-law or mother-in-law, a better grandpa and grandma. So, and then, it doesn't have to displace the primary ministry. It can complement that. And then lastly, as you build out what you feel is your primary calling, there are going to be leaders around you that are on your team that you'll be able to mentor using these same skills and help them be more effective.
Well, Lloyd, I loved our time together. I find it both convicting in some ways, but mostly inspiring in others. So
Yeah.
I know there's some things I'm going to have to get busy with. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking the time to do this.
You're welcome. Thanks for your friendship, Doug. And, we always learn from each person that we have with us on our webinars. And then we have the privilege of really seeking wisdom to know how to apply it in our own lives, right?
And I want to thank our audience. Thank you for taking time during your busy summer to join us. We had a good crowd tonight, and I want you to join us on our next upcoming webinar. We're going to skip a month, so we'll see you all again as we approach the end of the summer. So thank you, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Good night.